It's 1 o'clock, so I would like to welcome everyone to Measuring Purpose in the Financial Sector. For the best viewing experience, if you could please keep your video off during the presentation and your microphones on mute, as well as use speaker view, you'll have the best view of our special guests this afternoon. Please note that this webinar is being recorded for future use. My name is Archie Bonifacio. I'm the co-chair of the Canadian Credit Union Association's Community Impact Committee, and I'm grateful to be a guest on this land. I'm also YNCU's Chief Community Officer, and I would like to acknowledge the traditional territory where I'm broadcasting from. It's the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples, as well as on Robinson-Huron Treaty Territory, traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, specifically the Garden River and Botswana First Nations, as well as Métis people. I recognize in virtual meeting formats, you may be joining us from different traditional territories and may be on your own individual journeys towards reconciliation. My hope is we all act as guests of this land and take responsibility to serve as stewards of the land, air, and water, as the land is not ours, but rather owned by the original caretakers who came before us. And to ensure we get the key information to all participants on the webinar, please hold all questions at the end. You can raise your hand or submit the questions in the chat. You'll see that we have two expert panelists here, Maureen Young, Vice President, Social Purpose, Coast Capital, and Charla Vall, Consulting Director from Junxion Strategy. We will be getting them very shortly. In fact, if we go to the next slide, you'll see the agenda for this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you're in from. We'll give you a brief summary of who we are, who you're actually listening to, and then discuss the changing role of businesses, society, along with Coast Capital's journey to purpose and why we measure purpose. And finally, Coast Capital has been generous enough to share with a number of us that are on this call their purpose measurement framework and give us an idea of how we can get our organizations in that manner. So as we pass on to the quick introductions to the subject matter experts, I will mention that I am Archie Bonifacio, as the co-chair of the Community Impact Committee of the Canadian Credit Union Association, and that association is the National Trade Association of Canada's credit unions and Caisse Populaire outside of Quebec. It's made up of 194 members, and its vision is to support the success of Canada's credit unions, and they do this through advocacy and compliance, awareness and insights, alongside education and professional development. And I'd like to add, as an executive of one of the Ontario credit unions that is a member of CCUA, I would like to share how thankful we are to have them as our partners. And I'll turn it over to Maureen.
Thanks so much, Archie, and welcome and good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are across this amazing country. My name is Maureen. I'm with Coast Capital. Archie mentioned that I'm heading up the social purpose effort at Coast Capital. For those who don't know us, we're also proud CCUA members. We're a BC-based federal credit union with an 85-year history as of next year. We're also a B Corp, first certified in 2018 and looking forward to recertifying for the second time later this year. We've got nearly 600,000 members and 1,800 employees, and we offer personal and business banking and investment services digitally across Canada and through our 45 branches and advice center in British Columbia. We also offer commercial lending, leasing, loan financing as well. We made the move from being a provincial credit union to a federal financial cooperative a few years ago. And as we look to build a new corporate strategy to support that next chapter, we made the decision to adopt a social purpose business model because we believe it's the business model of the future. So I'm really looking forward to sharing how our purpose has brought focus to the impact we want to make on the world and how we've approached purpose measurement to monitor our progress. Back to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Maureen. So as Archie mentioned, I am Charla and I am with Junxion Strategy. So we are an international consultancy. We have offices in Vancouver, Toronto, and London. And for over 25 years now, we've been helping organizations to define their purpose, plan their impact, tell their stories, and embrace accountability, which we'll be talking a lot about today. Our purpose is to accelerate the shift to the purpose economy. And since 2016, we've been certified B Corp, We are a member of the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, and we co-founded the Canadian Purpose Economy Project, which is an initiative I encourage you to check out afterwards, and we'll speak a little bit more about this later on. So before we dive into measurement, we want to start by talking about the changing role of business in society. So there's lots of nuances here, but generally the conventional business model has really prioritized shareholders over all others. Its purpose has been to turn the greatest profit. And for many years, this was really considered the predominant role of business. You've all likely heard the quote from Milton Friedman in the 70s when he said that the social responsibility of business is to increase profits, and its only responsibility is to its shareholders. So this is really the shareholder-centric model of business. But we started to see expectations of businesses changing. People were becoming critical of the harm that businesses were doing to people, to communities, and to the planet. So companies started to appease consumers and employees by committing resources to organizations that were doing good. This is really the corporate social responsibility approach, or CSR. And in this model, doing good often involves outsourcing that task to others through donations to nonprofits and delegating the operations of it to a siloed part of the company, the CSR department. Now, I don't want to dismiss donations and donating. This is really an important interim solution, even today. Important interim solution for wealth distribution. But the CSR model tends to take donations as license to continue operating as the status quo and to continue doing harm. So then over the last decade or so, we've started to see the rise of what's called ESG. And this approach considers all the different ways that environmental, social, and governance factors might impact the financial profitability of a company or how the company may be impacting society or the environment. And it seeks to then minimize those harms. More recently, we've now seen a fourth trend taking off, and that is the purpose-driven business. And in this model, the business itself is a force for good and contributes solutions to society's greatest challenges beyond just minimizing harms. And this really requires the perspective that businesses need to consider all stakeholders. The pandemic and no doubt the tumultuousness of the last few years has tremendously accelerated this perspective of the role of business. Now, notably, for those of you that might be B Corp certified, purpose and stakeholder governance is actually one of the 10 impact areas that are outlined in the new B Corp standard. So in this impact area, companies will be expected to meet at a minimum these 6 criteria that I have listed on the slide. Essentially, you don't need to read them all, but essentially the impact area states that B Corps need to define and act in accordance with a defined purpose, contributing to an inclusive, equitable, and regenerative economic system for people on the planet. And as with all impact areas in the new B Corp standards, there will be an expectation of companies to monitor, report, and adapt. And so measurement is going to be especially important to those who are wishing to receive or maintain their B Corp certification. So that's an aside for those of you who are interested in B Corp certification or may have it. Now, I want to talk a little bit about purpose. Many of you are credit unions, and so your origins are already tied to a commitment to the well-being of communities. But you might not have articulated the reason that you exist through a purpose statement. So I want to touch on what we mean by purpose and how it's defined. At Junxion, we like to think about the 3 Ps that help organizations define their purpose. You might recognize this Venn diagram as an adaptation of Ikigai, if you've seen that book. That's a Japanese approach to finding one's personal purpose in the world. But we think about passion, So what is your organization's people most passionate about? And this is so important in terms of the path to finding your company's purpose, because you really want your people to have an emotional connection to your purpose that is rooted in the company's values and beliefs. If not, you or your staff will lose interest in your purpose over time because you're not intrinsically motivated to pursue it. And then we think about proficiency. So what is the organization really proficient at? In other words, what do you do well and what's earning your business a profit? Why is this so important to that purpose is linked to this? Well, for starters, if it's not connected to what you do well, you'll be unlikely to earn the profits that are necessary to fund meaningful progress towards your purpose. And if it's not profitable, it's going to remain tangential to your main activities, and it will be unlikely to be embedded and therefore unlikely to scale. Thirdly, your purpose should focus on one or more societal problems, because this is really what differentiates purpose-driven businesses from traditional businesses. They exist to benefit society. So we often point people to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals when they're trying to look for a problem that is in serious need of attention and considered, because these goals are really universally agreed upon as being the core areas requiring our collective action in order to end poverty, ensure prosperity, and protect the planet. But the problem that you're tackling should also be strategic, meaning relevant to your business. So that's why you want it to overlap with what you're good at and what you're passionate about. So you don't think of an outdoor apparel company or outdoor apparel as being relevant to the challenge of poverty. But Cotopaxi, if you know the outdoor apparel brand, has done a really good job of making that link. And this is likely because the passion for that cause is so deeply rooted in their company. So in sum, purpose lies at the intersection of what your team is passionate about, what your business is good at, and a relevant societal problem. Indeed, this is where you are uniquely positioned to make an impact. So let's define purpose in a really succinct way. This is one way of defining it. There are many, but we really like this definition from the British Standards Institution. It says that a social purpose business reason to exist is to make an optimal strategic contribution to the long-term well-being of all people and the planet. We say optimal because it means it's optimized for the scale of the company. It's ambitious, but it is feasible to make meaningful progress by leveraging your unique values, passion, and business strength. No one expects the hardware store down the road to be able to change the world. So you need to make it optimal for the scale of your business. By strategic, it is relevant to the business and in pursuit of a meaningful end. So you can start to see the relationship between this definition and that Venn diagram. And of course, purpose means to make a contribution to the long-term well-being of all people on the planet, of course. Arguably, if all 8 billion people on the planet had the means to come together and decide on a purpose, it would surely be survival. Our well-being is critically, collectively, our well-being is paramount. So how does purpose benefit your company? Well, in many ways, purpose benefits your company in that you're enabled to attract customers, employees, partners, and investors. So just for example, 87% of global consumers have been shown to want to buy brands that support a cause they care about. And 76% refuse to buy a brand if it doesn't. Research since the pandemic also shows that when a company has a purpose that the employee feels connected to, they're 5 times more likely to stay with that company over the long term. Having a purpose prioritizes minimizing harms by integrating sustainability, or ESG, as we spoke about, which thereby strengthens your operating context by reducing long-term costs and risks that might be generated by leaving those challenges unaddressed. And then by scaling social benefits, you're really creating an avenue for innovation because it leads you to think differently about your products or services, how they're designed to meet a societal need. This is really going to naturally inspire innovation. And this is a virtuous cycle. As you scale your social benefits, you're growing because it's resonating with stakeholders. And as you grow through good and creating impact, it then strengthens your operating context further because you're reducing risks and you're further able to invest in scaling those social benefits. So very quickly, how does purpose fit into your organization? How do you embed it? Well, purpose sits at atop the metaphorical house. So you see here the house diagram. It's at the crux because it defines why you exist. Everything else must therefore be in alignment. Your vision is what the world would look like if you achieve your purpose, and your mission is how you're going to do it. Then sits your culture, your values, your strategy, and your brand position. And finally, underneath of that is you have metrics, which we'll talk more about. And then finally, you have your operating model and your governance. So I'm going to pass it back to Maureen now, who is going to talk about Coast's journey to finding purpose and embedding within their organization.
Excellent. Yes, really pleased to share a little bit about the journey that we have been on. And thanks, Charla, for setting up just a bit of context there for people to understand what we're talking about when we talk about social purpose. So driving impact in our communities has always been a priority at Coast Capital. And Charla, you can flip the slide now. Thank you so much. We have a proud almost 85-year history, and we see purpose as an evolution. It's really an evolution of a decades-long commitment of giving back to our communities and of our cooperative roots and ESG and CSR programs. And for example, those would be from our B Corp certification, where we can verify our ESG performance, accountability, and transparency, to becoming a Net Zero Banking Alliance signatory, to our equity, diversity, and inclusion strategy and action plan, our employee volunteer program, as well as reinvesting 10% of our budgeted bottom line back into the communities we serve. More recently, we were recognized in Corporate Knights' first ever rating of social purpose companies, one of 34 companies in Canada identified as authentically implementing a social purpose. And that's really speaking to that strategic house that Charla talked about, and the different places where purpose needs to be embedded. And we were one of just 8 companies to receive a platinum rating. And I do want to call out some credit union peers who also made the list, and credit unions are really leading in this space. So adopting a social purpose has taken the commitments that we've made to our employees and our members and our communities much further than ever before, because in adopting a social purpose, companies are harnessing not only their CSR programs, but all aspects of their operations to drive that societal impact. So how did we get here? A few years ago, as part of the development of our 5-year strategy, we made the decision to become a social purpose business. And in defining our unique social purpose, we started with research to help us understand the issues impacting Canadians. That's that relevant social issue that Charlotte described earlier. We listened to our employees, our members. We talked to our communities so that we could better understand their needs and concerns. And we learned, of course, that people in Canada are working harder than ever to get ahead. They're facing record debt levels, income instability, and struggling to access what they need to thrive. And so with that information in hand, we asked ourselves, what's the role of business in advancing progress on these issues? What are we doing to be part of the solution? And what unique skills do we have at Coast Capital that will allow us to drive meaningful change for Canadians and Canadian businesses? And as we asked ourselves these questions, we grappled with where Coast Capital should best focus our efforts. So we looked at what the world needs, what our organization does best, and it's in that intersection of needs and our own capabilities that our purpose was born. So Coast Capital's purpose is to build better futures together with a vision to unlock financial opportunities and grow incomes to positively impact people and communities. We believe that every person in Canada deserves a financial partner who cares about them and their success, and that's why our purpose, our reason for being, is rooted in helping people and businesses in Canada build their better future. Social purpose engages your employees, your customers, in our case, members, and your communities, both as participants in the purpose and beneficiaries of the purpose. And we've alluded to that in our purpose statement, building better futures together, because companies can't achieve a social purpose on their own. No one player can move the needle on the complex social issues that we're facing. And we want to help move the needle for all our stakeholders. We also want to engage them in delivering the purpose. And just as an example of that, because we know the role of meaningful living wage employment in achieving our best life, we're building practices and programs to help our employees thrive and grow in their careers. We want them to be a primary beneficiary of the purpose. At the same time, we're drawing on their talents and their expertise so that they can help our members by delivering the financial education, the trusted advice, the skills-based volunteering, etc., that will really support our members in their quest to build a better future. So as we contemplated how to measure and report on purpose, one of the first places that we looked at was B Corp. I know some in the audience may be B Corps, but certainly if you're not a B Corp, you are undoubtedly already tracking some metrics. And so keep that in mind as I'm describing our process here. So as a B Corp, we knew we were hitting certain benchmarks that demonstrated our commitment in action. We track almost 300 metrics across B Corp's 5 impact areas of employees, members, communities, governance, and environment. So now that we'd identified our purpose, we undertook a gap and opportunity analysis. Which metrics should we be striving for excellence in, given our purpose? And how are we faring on those metrics? And what opportunities remained for us as we work to deliver on our purpose commitment? So that resulted in a short list of metrics, what we called our B Corp roadmap. And that became a rolling 3-year plan that we implemented by engaging a wide cross-section of people across the company to close the gaps. But we wanted to go further. We needed to add metrics that would specifically measure progress towards our unique purpose, which is to unlock financial opportunities and grow incomes. And so with that, I'll turn it back to Charla to take us on the next part of the journey.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Maureen. So I want to talk first about why we should measure purpose. Measurement essentially gives you the answer to the question, is my organization contributing to the positive change that we want to create? Can we prove it? And how could we be doing better? And by better, I mean differently, more effectively, more efficiently. And you simply can't answer these questions objectively without the methodical and structured process of measuring your impact. There are also many benefits to measuring purpose. So through the process of setting up a measurement framework, which I will touch on in a moment, you develop really clear goals for your organization to work towards, aligning your entire company around them. It enables you to mobilize the necessary resources. This really allows you to channel your finite amount of resources in the sense that you direct them towards reaching your goals. But additionally, measurement helps you to find out what's working and what's not, so that you can learn where it makes sense to invest and where it doesn't. It also enables you to be accountable and transparent, essentially. So because through measurement, you can really generate the evidence to say that you're doing what you said you were going to do. So just consider the greenwashing bill. Whether you like the bill or not, it really points to the fact that expectations around transparency are only heightening. But not only does measurement enable you to be transparent about your progress towards your commitments, Sharing your stories of impact enables you to inspire others. So just look at PayPal, for example. They set a goal to increase their employees' net disposable income to 20%. At the time, it was as low as 4 to 6% for some of the company's US-based hourly and entry-level employees. One full year after instituting a number of substantive changes to improve their employees' financial well-beings, they estimate that the minimum NDI, or net disposable income, among hourly and entry-level workers was approximately 16%. And so by setting this target and sharing their progress, they're not only being accountable, but they're also generating a huge source of inspiration for others. So now to the meat of it. How do you go about impact measurement or purpose measurement? Well, we think it starts by mapping out the change that you want to occur. This is a template for a theory of change. And without getting too technical, I want to give you a quick overview of what it is because we think it's a critical starting place. First of all, it's a framework that the nonprofit sector has been using for decades, but we think it's transferable to companies that want to create positive change too. A theory of change simply looks to illustrate how do we get from here to there. So at the top of the theory of change is your impact statement, the ultimate impact that you wish to create. So for a purpose-driven company, this is essentially represents your purpose realized or your vision. Now, if you have a purpose statement already, but you didn't consider the 3 Ps that we talked about when you developed your purpose statement, this is a really good time to ensure that you as an organization are really clear about what the problem is that's underlying your purpose statement. So for example, we helped Kicking Horse Coffee, many of you might know them, develop a theory of change. Their purpose is to wake up the world. But we gathered a group of their organization together to say, but what problem are you actually addressing under that? What do you need to wake the world up to? And it took quite a bit of conversation and effort to really get them to articulate and agree upon what was the problem underlying. At the bottom of the theory of change, you'll see the activities that you're primarily going to put into play in order to achieve your desired impact. Sometimes these activities are lumped together into different strategic priorities. And above those strategies or activities are the first layer of results that you would expect to see from your actions. These are essentially your short-term outputs, the people that were reached, trained, served, etc. Many people stop their measurement efforts here. A theory of change asks you to think much bigger, to reflect not just on the short-term outputs of your activities, but also the intermediate and longer-term outcomes that are going to emerge from those outputs over time. So it asks you to outline the necessary changes that need to happen along the way to your vision. What policies, behaviors, ecosystems need to evolve, adapt, or shift in order to see those longer-term changes? Now, don't get me wrong, outputs do matter. They are important and you need them first. Outcomes, which really refers to the change that occurred after achieving the output, are much harder to measure. They usually require surveys or focus groups or all of those things. But especially when you disaggregate the results by different social and economic positionings, they are really, really powerful to be able to demonstrate and see who's being impacted and who might be being left out by the work that you're doing. And what I especially love about the process of developing a theory of change is that it prompts you to think about the assumptions that you're making about how change happens, but you can test those assumptions along the way. So let's look at an example. Imagine one component of a company's strategy is to provide affordable financing for newcomers, specifically to achieve accreditation in their area of expertise. You might assume that this is going to lead to employment and a few years later, to accreditation. And a few years later, this is going to lead them to achieving employment. And a few years later, this is going to enable them to gain home ownership and financial stability. and that this would ultimately lead to financial well-being for all. What assumptions might we be making in that theory of change about how change is going to happen? Well, you're assuming that those individuals have financial management capabilities. You're assuming they don't have a bunch of debt that they need to pay off, that they're not facing other barriers to saving. And you're perhaps not considering the systemic factors that are preventing these changes from occurring, like discriminatory policies and practices, mindsets, and attitudes in society that prevent them from making these fundamental improvements to their lives. And so this might lead you to realize that, in fact, affordable financing for newcomers isn't going to be enough to get us there. Now, we're certainly not saying that you have to do it all and address all of those barriers, but it is going to help you identify what kinds of partnerships do we need to make in order to get to the change that we want to make. And I know that Maureen, if she were asked, would be able to speak to many of the partnerships that they've created to try and make the change that they want to see. Yes, this is going to be a lot of work because meaningful change really takes a long time to see, and it's not going to happen overnight or just by seeing a few outputs. But once you have this mapped out, measuring your progress becomes a whole lot more straightforward. And I don't mean easy, and you'll find out when we hear from Maureen on their process, but it is going to be much more straightforward. Switch the slide there. Now you simply need to outline the metrics that are associated with each outcome that you've listed on your theory of change. For example, the number of participants who secure jobs would be one of the outcomes. And then you would set an indicator. Your indicator is the number of participants who secure jobs. And then you would set a target associated with that. We want 75% of our participants to secure jobs. You would then determine the tools that you're going to use to measure that. And this is where the impact assessment can become really, really handy, because if you're already collecting data to be B Corp certified, then you can look at that and say, what can we already use that we're already collecting? You can identify the timeline, so when you plan to collect that data, and then how you will use and present your data in terms of your reporting. I want to quickly mention here that the process of measurement must unequivocally involve those that you are trying to benefit. Doing so really creates opportunities to learn who your stakeholders are. And when you learn more about your stakeholders, you learn how to better engage them in creating change and how to create better results for them. This allows you to uncover new and innovative ideas by inviting them to input and co-create your approach to impact measurement. And related to that, you might learn that impact is benefiting some groups more than others, and that's creating inequitable outcomes. So impact measurement is also very much tied to addressing inequity. That's an important thing to know. So this structure for a framework follows the 5 essential practices of impact measurement that's outlined by the Common Approach. Together, they're called the Common Foundations, and they represent best practices that set a minimum standard for the how of impact, and by extension, purpose measurement. So first, you want to describe your intended change. This is essentially your theory of change. You want to use indicators. So how are you going to know that progress and change have occurred? So the number of people that completed a course, the number that changed their behaviors, or at a systems level, it might be the number of companies that have introduced a policy, or the people that have been impacted by that policy. You then want to collect useful information, decide what data you need to collect in order to interpret the change, and have a clear plan for that collection and collect it in a routine and consistent way. Finally, fourthly, you want to gauge performance impact, review the information and analyze it, and draw conclusions about your impact based on reasonable assumptions. And then finally, you want to communicate and use the results. Communicating is one thing. This is really what we spoke about in terms of sharing the results, but using the results is one that sometimes gets overlooked. So of course, this is an exercise in accountability and transparency, but if you're not learning and adapting based on those results, then you're really losing a great deal of value that is generated from measurement. A quick example of this on using the results and the importance of disaggregating the results. So in Canada, during the pandemic, we saw that in the US, marginalized populations were seeing higher rates of COVID at hospitals. So we wondered if that was happening here. But we weren't disaggregating the data here. And so a group formed called the Black Equity Health Group, and they advocated for disaggregating the data. And they were successful in their advocacy efforts to the health region, and they were able to get them to collect and analyze the data in a disaggregated manner. So how is COVID affecting groups based off of race, gender, and other demographic points? And when they did this, they saw that they needed to change their health interventions to reach populations that weren't being reached by their current interventions. So without this data and disaggregating, we don't know what or how to change our approaches. And even worse, if we don't use that data to actually get better, then we're really missing out. So a whole lot of value can be gained from collecting and using this information. I'll turn it back to Maureen, who's going to take us through COAST's Purpose Measurement Framework.
Thanks, Charla. So putting this methodology into action, our first task was to articulate our theory of change. You can just flip the slide there, Charla. So we had done a significant amount of research at the outset of our purpose journey, and so we drew on that. But we went further, and together with our partners at Junxion and with our great advisor, Coro Strandberg, we consulted with key stakeholders internally and externally in the wider ecosystem. So that included community organizations, it included post-secondary institutions, think tanks, recognized experts, and some of our peer credit unions. And so we summarized the underlying problem that Charla referenced as income inequality. You see that on the left. And the long-term change that we're hoping to drive outlined on the far right, purpose realized, with the outputs and the outcomes each aligned to the pillars of our social purpose sitting in the middle. Income inequality is a very highly complex problem, and it requires a multifaceted approach. And Charla spoke earlier about how the social purpose business's reason to exist is to make an optimal and strategic contribution to the long-term well-being of people and planet. And so with that in mind, we considered the areas where we felt we could best influence to make a meaningful contribution. And so first, making the strategic decision to harness the full business model, take on that social purpose approach to drive impact. Then focusing our efforts on some specific strategies. So for us, we decided our opportunity was to help people and business unlock financial opportunities and grow incomes by building and supporting accessible education, equitable employment, and inclusive finance, and by growing the purpose economy. And in doing so, we would see more people accessing those supports. So those would be the short-term outputs that we talked about earlier, which would ultimately result in the longer-term outcomes, which would be measurable improvement in financial opportunities and incomes. And we set that as our 2040 goal. And just to provide a little bit more insight into how we landed on our purpose pillars, with that long-term goal of helping people and businesses unlock financial opportunities and grow incomes, we zeroed in on these key strategies. First, recognizing that there are significant shifts in the economy that are changing workforce expectations, whether that's from digitization, automation, the shift to a low carbon economy, or AI. We know that today's workforce is facing the need to upskill or in some cases completely reskill to stay relevant. And we also know that for some, the barriers to achieve that education, upskilling, and reskilling are higher than for others. And so we're building and championing more equitable access to education, upskilling, and reskilling, and recognize the role of education in positioning people for income growth. Second, we know that quality employment is key for most of us in building a strong future for ourselves and our families. We believe equitable and inclusive workplaces that support people to build a meaningful career is crucial, and it's a tremendous responsibility of the business sector to get that right. Third, for people and businesses to thrive, they need access to affordable financial services, the tools and the knowledge to manage their financial obligations and take advantage of financial opportunities so that they can have confidence in their financial future. And finally, we believe more businesses in Canada should adopt a social purpose. It's a role that society needs business to play, and by growing the purpose economy, we can extend our impact in a meaningful way. And that's why, like Junxion, we are also co-founders of the Canadian Purpose Economy Project. It's only through collaboration that we can achieve our social purpose ambition, and that means a shift in approach from focusing solely on our own gains as a company to seeking reciprocal, mutually beneficial relationships. It's a shift from having a limited ESG impact, largely on the side of the company, to greater societal impact through every aspect of our operations. And from managing our stakeholders to engaging and mobilizing them around our shared goals. So it's a tremendously gratifying way of working, and collaborating with the broader ecosystem is really opening up some exciting opportunities. So all of this now leads to our purpose measurement framework, which is centered on our theory of change and our long-term 2040 goal, which we've aligned with our 100th anniversary. We've then identified 2030 goals aligned to each of the strategies that we're focusing on. And within each goal area, we've set 3-year output metrics and longer-term outcome metrics. And in selecting metrics, we've drawn on our corporate strategy and our other commitments, like our EDI commitments and our B Corp effort. In the last slide, I talked about how critical it is for a social purpose company to collaborate with others in the ecosystem to drive societal change. So in our framework, we not only have metrics that speak to the change we want to drive for our members, but we've included metrics that also speak to leading by example with our employees, as well as metrics focused on measuring our efforts in driving system change, all of this leading to that broader societal impact that we hope to have. And as data is collected against the metrics, Coast can use this evidence for the purpose of learning and adapting its strategic direction, recognizing that our strategy over that long-term period to 2040 will change over time, right? We will have different strategies to drive the progress toward our purpose. And so the 3-year metrics will allow us to learn, refine, and adapt. And so the last slide here is how it all comes together. And you can see the overarching approach. So you've got the purpose right at the top of the house, building better futures together, which we want to keep an eye on leading indicators on income inequality in Canada. We have that overarching 2040 purpose goal and metric. We have 2030 goals and metrics aligned to the 3 pillars of our social purpose, and 3-year metrics aligned to the pillars that ladder up to the 2030 goals. We've also included our B Corp score as a cross-cutting metric, as it really does measure both outputs and outcomes. We think it's a great one to keep included. And we've included goals and metrics focused on measuring our efforts to advance our purpose internally, so the processes and the way we're embedding and integrating purpose, but also the support of the growth of the purpose economy more generally, so looking at the broader outcomes. A couple of notes on 3-year metrics is, you need these metrics to be particularly dynamic. the 3-year time frame gives us the ability to set new metrics as our practice matures and evolves. It also gives us the opportunity to shift our shorter term goals to meet the ever-changing needs of members, employees, and communities, and address changes that are based on, the socioeconomic factors and other factors that are outside of our direct control. We're excited to be publishing our first purpose disclosure next spring. And so I'll ask you to watch for that. And lastly, just before I finish here, I do want to give a few call outs. And first is to thank Charla and the team at Junxion for their support through the development of our approach to measurement. It's been a great working relationship. Second, major call out to Coro Strandberg, who I know many of you know. She's been such a great advisor to us through this process and beyond. And I'd also like to encourage you to check out the Canadian Purpose Economy Project, purposeeconomy.ca. It's a dynamic initiative aimed at growing the purpose economy, and there's all kinds of phenomenal resources there that businesses can access on the purpose journey. And of particular relevance to this discussion is the recent publication that provides guidance to issuers and preparers of purpose disclosures. So be sure to watch for that. Okay, well, thank you very much. And I think with that, we turn it back to you, Archie.
Yes, thank you very much, Maureen and Charla. Thank you very much for your generosity of the knowledge and your time for today. I recognize a lot of people that are participating in this call, and I'm going to try to pull out some of the questions I think they may be curious about. If you do have questions and would like to be part of the recording, raise your hand. We'll put you on camera, and you can ask it live, or just feel free to send it into the chat. But one thing that you that stuck with myself, and I think with a number of other individuals, is that slide that you had where you want to lead by example. And I can see Coast Capital Maureen is leading by example. And then you want to offer the products, and then you want to shift and change the credit union system, right? Because that's how we can make this. We all do it together. We all collaborate and we all cooperate. So very appreciative about that. And I think a lot of us are curious of just what it was like to gather all this information for this purpose disclosure. We may not be as close to that stage yet as organizations, but just curious as to what that was like.
Well, it's not over. We're in the midst of it. Have an amazing lead of our purpose performance measurement, Amanda Welsh-Loss. I want to call Amanda out. She has been an incredible support, as well as our enterprise analytics team at Coast. So they're supporting us to build a purpose dashboard so that we can be finding an easier way to collect the relevant metrics. And, hopefully as we get better at it, we can have almost a real-time view of how we're doing. That would be on the outputs side, of course, not the outcomes side. So we're in the process of building that. There's been a lot of work underway, and that's going to be something that we draw on, obviously, for our first purpose disclosure. So yes, it's a big effort.
Well, Maureen, we have a follow-up question from Dominique, who is saying, what proportion of your metrics are in-house surveys, and how much are you gathering from external statistics in either StatsCan or maybe even local third-party surveys?
Yeah, so we have within each goal area, and we've got 4 goal areas, we have one metric inside each that is looking at the number of people and businesses in Canada who have improved their financial opportunities or grown their incomes due to Coast Capital's collaboration efforts within those pillars. So we have one metric within each that is focused on those. Mm-hmm. And then the other metrics would focus on something that is employee focused and something that is member focused.
Awesome.
If that helps.
I think it does. Charla.
Yeah.
A lot of the individuals, again, that I'm recognizing are the champions of their credit unions or really big leaders with respect to leading social purpose within their organizations. But I kind of sometimes wonder this question about profit and purpose. How do you respond to people that say profit and purpose are in conflict, and what are some companies that have kind of gotten over that potential conflict and been really, really successful with this?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing that I would say is that profits and purpose are not mutually exclusive. And in fact, you need both. So if you're not, and it's sort of as I mentioned when I was talking about identifying a problem that's associated with something that your business is good at, it's because you need profits in order to be able to sustain the investments that you're going to need to put into making an impact. And then it's circuitous, right? Because the more impact that you're making in the world, that's going to attract, employees and investors and customers. And that is only going to support your profits as well. So I would very much argue that profits and purpose are not in conflict, or they don't need to be. But certainly, if you are only focusing on one, if you're only focusing on profits, then you're likely doing harm. There's a good chance that you're not considering all stakeholders. And so that's where purpose kind of comes in to balance that out and ensure that you're thinking about all stakeholders. And again, making sure that you're making a profit while you do it.
No.
I might just add to that at Coast Capital, we talk about driving profit through purpose. And, that really speaks to ensuring that the purpose that you select for your organization is relevant to your stakeholders. If you have a purpose that is relevant and meaningful to them, then your strategy to deliver the purpose should be very engaging to your customers, and you should grow the organization, and that's going to allow you to scale the impact. So it's very critical.
And I love what you said about where the individuals that are affected are the membership, the communities, and the employees, or the people of these credit unions. But not only are they the people implementing it, but they're also the beneficiaries. So that's kind of why knowing who your stakeholders are makes a lot of sense. Tessa gave us a shout out for a great session. And then we have another follow-up question for you, Maureen, from Linda. How are the set of purpose measurements incorporated into Coast Capital's operational corporate KPIs?
Great question. So we have every year we identify one or more KPIs from our purpose plan into the broader operational performance measurement. So that is always included. Currently, we have the B Corp score as one measure that we really highlight within that plan. And it is, because we haven't yet we haven't put out our first baseline of data for our performance purpose measurement framework. So the B Corp metric and that short list, I think you may have heard me say that we've got a specific set of metrics within B Corp that we think we should excel at if we're living our purpose. And so we've set a target against that, an internal target. If we achieve those things, then our score should be this by the end of the year. And then that becomes a key KPI within our performance measurement. As our purpose metrics come into play and we've got the data, then we can start to move some more of those metrics right into the scorecard.
No, that's awesome. Thank you. Charla, you'd made reference to the common approach. There's a question around that. Can I just clarify? It's www.commonapproach.org. That's the reference point that you're using?
Yes. Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. I also have another question here. Actually, Jesse would like to add on that question and say, how do you approach requests actually, no, let me just take a step back. Caitlin started by saying it was mentioned that donations are an interim solution. Would you say that the strategic and purpose-driven donations have a place in a purpose-driven credit union as well? Or do you mean to say that investments would take a different form when moving from ESG to fully purpose-driven?
Yes, and so I'm glad that I have the opportunity to clarify that. So when I was speaking about donations within the context of, it was within the context of corporate social responsibility as an approach to a way of doing business. And it was not to say that donations are wrong. In fact, they're so important. And I meant an interim solution to wealth distribution while our tax system does not work incredibly well. And Coast is has lots of examples of the donations that they're making in a really purposeful way. And again, are so, so important to the community. It's when donations give a company license to do harm. That's when it's a problem. And that's the CSR, typically the CSR model.
So as an example, if you are doing something harmful to the environment, but you're buying offset credits, that is not the spirit of all these things. But that is, Caitlin, thank you for that clarification. Jesse would like to go a little bit further with that. Maybe this is more for Maureen. It's actually something I know that many credit unions probably will face if they are going to transition more to purpose-driven donations. She's asking, how do you approach requests on ongoing donation sponsorship commitments that no longer fit within the pillars once you've created your purpose measurements? Do you change them? Do you transition them? What would your advice be?
Yes, thank you. We see our community investment as an incredible tool for advancing our purpose, for sure. 10% of our budget bottom line is a lot. So it's a great way for us to be able to partner with organizations in the community to drive impact. We did, as we narrowed in on this plan, of course, determine that, we really wanted to double down on those things that would advance the purpose, and that we might have to exit some things that were no longer a fit. So that was a decision that we took. We provided a good timeline for that. So for organizations that we had been funders of for some period of time, we let them know that we're shifting our strategy. We provided a transition grants to support them until they could bring other funders on stream, and gave them lots of notice for that. And that was very well received. In general, I would say that, a lot of the organizations that we work with appreciated that we had a higher ambition that we were aiming for, that we weren't using the peanut butter approach on our donations, but really trying to focus those. There are things that companies have to do because you're a good corporate citizen. Like you should support hospitals, and you should support food banks, and etc. So we do always retain a portion of our budget for those sort of corporate citizenship type activities, but we try to keep the majority of our community investment focused on our purpose.
That's great advice, especially for some legacy types of relationships that you have as
That's right.
I will say that Tessa, you just gave a nice shout out to Charla and an article she wrote. It talks about the difference between purpose, CSR, and ESG. There's a link there in the chat. What suggestions do you have to ensure that companies are implementing their purpose internally, and what are the best practice metrics?
Well, we spent the first few years, honestly, building the foundation that would support purpose execution. So that means setting it up in your governance model. We wanted to signal to our organization that we were shifting from CSR to purpose. So we actually disbanded our corporate social responsibility department, and we established the social purpose office. We created a social purpose operating committee because, there could be the danger of people still thinking, oh, well, the purpose office will take care of that, and we'll just continue doing our thing over here. So we created a social purpose operating committee with sort of key decision makers, key folks from across different business lines to really hold the accountability for purpose, the oversight for purpose, to champion purpose. So that was great. We put it into our values. We made sure that it was reflected in our brand. Of course, I've already spoken about it being reflected within our strategy and in our performance measurements. So those are all really important things to do to make sure that you are embedding purpose. And you kind of want to do those things really before you even start to go speak externally about your purpose, because you want to make sure that your people are all feeling like they understand it and they know their role in it.
Yeah, and that's really kind of the key, is engaging employees. Do either of you have advice about that? Like internally, how do you get not just a few people excited about this, but everyone in the organization excited about it?
Certainly, we did a big all staff event when we first adopted our purpose. Then we had something we called strategy table talks, where we would have smaller groups across the different departments have a chance to talk about what it means to adopt purpose, and what it could look like, and how we might be able to bring it to life. We created a Social Purpose 101 webinar for all staff to be able to get a base level of understanding of what purpose is. And then we hosted we called them lunch on purpose events, where we bring in a speaker and we just provide sort of a quick lunch hour type learning opportunity for everyone to build their social purpose literacy. But it's an ongoing journey, and I think we're definitely very focused on making sure that our employees feel connected to our purpose. And in fact, one of the metrics that we've chosen is something we call the Employee Purpose Index. And so that's a set of 3 questions embedded into our employee engagement survey, asking employees if they understand the purpose, if they feel engaged in the purpose, et cetera. And we watch that number and make sure that we're thinking about how we can help to strengthen it over time.
Oh, that's great.
I'll just add, Archie, to this question, but also to the previous question about how to embed purpose throughout the organization, because there's a couple of really good resources that people can look to. One of which is the Corporate Knights and Social Purpose Institute report that I just provided the link to in the chat box, where they assessed Canadian social purpose companies on how well they are executing on their purpose. So not necessarily what kind of impact are they creating, but how well are they actually embedding it into the strategy and governance of their organization. And so it lays out the various aspects that they looked at and serve as really good cues as to how you can, or where you should be looking to embed purpose. And then throughout the organization. And then the second resource that I would point to is also on the Social Purpose Institute's website, and it's a 25-point assessment tool that helps you. If you can fill out the tool on your own to just look at, what are the different areas that you are embedding purpose into the organization, and see how you're doing on that, and what you should be doing, or where the gaps might be.
Perfect.
And then the only other piece I wanted to add on the question about engaging employees in purpose, if you're at the stage where you don't yet have a purpose statement, it's really, when you're coming up with that purpose statement, you're identifying what your purpose is and coming up with a purpose statement. This is a really, really critical starting point to start engaging your employees. So you don't want it to be developed by a handful of people in a boardroom. You really want to engage your staff in that process, so that, again, you can identify what the organization people are passionate about, and that way you're going to have much greater success in terms of having them engaged in execution of that purpose.
I think that's really, really good advice. A lot of great shout outs. Are getting one on pioneering all this work, Maureen at Coast. So thank you very much for that. And for Charla for being great partners with them to get this through. I would like to say there's only one outstanding question, and it is just the information that's provided in this seminar. Will it be circulated? And the answer is yes. We will be sending this out, a link to it and the recording, as well as I believe there's a case study that we can kind of share the work that the two of you did together, that all the participants can have and read and look over. And so
the case
again,
study of Coast and a guide to measuring social purpose. So essentially this session summarized in a document.
That's awesome. Well, everybody's saying they learned a lot. Thank you again for your generosity of time and your information and your insights and wisdom. This has been great. Thank you everybody else for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks,
And
everyone.
thanks for facilitating, Archie. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. I learned a lot.